Evening everyone. It's 6 o'clock on Tuesday 16th of January. Welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee. I'm Councillor Chris Pearson, Chair of this committee. In the event of any emergency, and I'm not aware of any planned practices this evening, then please evacuate the Town Hall via the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Romwell Street. The meeting is being held in the Grand Jury Room at the Town Hall, is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube website and can be watched afterwards if you so wish. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone. Members of the committee are reminded that they may use electronic devices but should set these to silent before we begin. Please use them discreetly during the course of the meeting if you so desire. There are toilets on every floor of the building and an induction loop in this room. If needed, we will have a short break at 8 o'clock. But I'm not anticipating, unless I've misinterpreted the agenda, that we're going to be going that late this evening. So I'll just start by going around the room and also online to introduce everyone. So I'll start on my left, Councillor Smith.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Smith, St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Evening, Councillor Vanessa Moffat from Mile End Ward.
Good evening, Andrew Weeks, Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer.
Good evening, Hayley McGrath, Corporate Governance Manager.
Good evening, Councillor Sarah Naylor, Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Tiptree Ward.
William Sunnox, Rural North Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Dave Harris, Beerchurch Ward.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
And online, Andrew?
Good evening, Andrew Small, Council's Section 151 Officer.
Welcome everyone. Item 2, substitutions. We've already heard that Councillor Moffat is substituting for Councillor Jay. Item 3, urgent items. I'm not aware of any. No. Item 4, any declarations of interest? Councillor Moffat.
Yes, Colchester Commercial Holdings is mentioned on items 8, 11 and 12, and I'm on the Board of Directors.
Thank you. Any others? No. Item 5 then, minutes of the meeting of the 28th of November. I know there were some gremlins in the originally published document. Have we now corrected those? Thank you. Any other points about the minutes? No? Can we confirm those as an accurate record now then? Thank you. And that moves us on to have your say. The public are queuing up to get in as we speak. No, so there no have your says this evening. So that takes us on to item 7 and that's a verbal update from our Section 151 officer. At this point, Andrew, I'll bring you in, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you say, I promised an update on the state of play in terms of producing the final accounts for 22-23. We had indicated that we were aiming for the 12th of January. Probably will not have escaped your notice that we didn't manage to achieve that date, but we did realise that ahead of that date, if I'm honest with you. But we are making good progress, and I'm pleased to be able to report that one of the key areas that was causing some concern, I think, amongst members was transparency about the Council's level of reserves and balances. And that's one of the things that we have struck a position on, really, and we've circulated that amongst some members as well. So I think that was a key statement, in fact, in terms of getting to a conclusion in terms of the overall production of the accounts. We've also balanced as well, which is another key element of it. We are confident that we can achieve this by the end of January, so that's another 2 weeks. We've updated the notice on the council's website to say that to that effect, but making good progress at this point in time. I mean, it has been a challenge. I mean, we had a change of key personnel towards the end of last year, which has been one of the delaying factors. But we replaced our member of staff with some agency staff, and that individual is doing a good job. So we're now confident that we'll get to the publish date by the end of January. That's probably all I wanted to say, Chair, at this point.
Thank you. Questions, comments? I think I'll just remind everyone that we have a standing item on our agenda now where we do have Section 151 officer just give us an update on where we're at with things, and I know it's been exercising a number of us around the table where we're actually at with reserves. I've seen those figures, and I believe Councillor Dundas has as well. So I'll just pass on for comments. Did I see your hand up, Councillor Sunnox?
Yes, on reserves, a definitive position and some clarity, and I have been given a spreadsheet with some much clearer figures on reserves, which many thanks. My question is, and it's a really important one, are there going to be any big audit adjustments coming through that hit the reserves, and have we agreed all the items with the auditors already that might affect reserves? And I would say it would be quite difficult to do that because we're only even talking about the 2021 accounts with the auditors at the moment. The 2022 accounts haven't actually seen. So it's the sort of balance sheet items, the provisions for bad debts, the consequences of the dormanting of these companies, make me really worried that there could be some backdated impact that comes at us, and it's a worry when you've been almost 4 years now without an audit.
Thank you. Mr. Small, I'll bring you in just to respond to that, if I may, at this stage. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, I think I'd probably say that I agree with Councillor Sunnox in terms of the concern about the length of time since we've had an audit of the council's accounts. And we are, and I can reassure the committee that we are chasing our auditors. And I do also speak to my colleagues across Essex as well, who, with our auditors BDO, are experiencing the same position, if I'm honest with you. Nobody's really getting any engagement at this point in time. That said, and I'll just come back to the audit landscape a bit more at the end, if I may. The accounts are prepared to the best of our knowledge and our understanding, really, if I'm honest with you. So we produce them confident that we're presenting the correct position. I mean, yes, there's always a risk that audit may say, no, you've interpreted something incorrectly, but that's the role of audit. But certainly, I think at this point in time that all of the issues that we're aware of, we believe we've correctly reflected within the accounts at the end of 22-23. There may be some adjustments to reserves, I think, in 23-24 as a result of the issues that Councillor Sunnox has referenced, but we believe they're correctly stated at least at the end of 2022-23. So just in terms of the overall audit landscape, so we referenced at the latter part of last year that the government had a plan to try and ease the backlog or remedy the backlog of outstanding audits, of which there are hundreds across the country at this moment in time. And it all looks a bit intractable in terms of what the solution for that might be. But the government published a paper which was going to introduce statutory deadlines by which certain accounts must be either signed off by the auditors or qualified, in essence, to say that the auditors couldn't gain enough reassurance to produce an unqualified report, which has all sorts of ramifications if that's the case, really, in terms of moving forward and balances brought forward and reliance of incoming auditors on the positions and brought forward balances. I think that was that it wasn't really a consultation paper. It was a statement about government's thinking. We're expecting a consultation any day now but it's been delayed, I think, by government at least a couple of weeks or so, and it's probably about 4 weeks late at this point in time. But we are expecting this consultation. I was speaking to the head of public sector audit for a different firm earlier in the week, actually, and it was his belief that 30th of September this year would be the date by which all historic accounts had to be signed off by. Doesn't include the accounts for 2023-24, but up to then, all of the accounts would have to be signed off by that date or qualified. And I suppose I was concerned to hear from him that there's the view that from the auditing firms, if they can't get to a point where they can provide reasonable assurance, then their view is they probably won't bother starting those audits just to save the taxpayer money, rather than spending a lot of time, money, and expense, and actually not drawing any conclusion. Which I think I was disappointed to hear. I think, and I expressed my view to him really that I think, as Councillor Sunnox has said, really, I think the public generally want some reassurance, credibility about the state of public finances, and I think producing qualified accounts is detrimental, I think, to the credibility of the sector at a time where there's considerable concern about the finances of councils generally. So I don't think it's a positive move forward, but it does sound as if this is the direction of travel. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Those of us who have been around governance and audit for a number of years now have been aware for at least 5 that there have been issues with external auditors doing things on time. The last 2 years it's been particularly difficult, and that does cause some consternation, some anxiety, but I think I am as reassured as I can be, given that we have changed our finance officers in the last 12 months, and I'm sure that Andrew and the team have gone through everything with a fine-tooth comb, because they are new, they're a fresh pair of eyes, and if there was anything there as they've turned the stones over for us to be concerned about, I'm sure they would have raised that with us by now. I'm due to attend a meeting of audit committee chairs in a couple of weeks' time, when I'm hoping that we'll get a further update as to... Have we lost Robert? No. We'll get a further update as to where the whole country's at in terms of auditing public finances. But until then, as Mr. Small's just informed us, we're still very much in the dark as to when we're likely to have our audits completed and what format those audits are likely to take. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, well, there's no point in me going over this auditor blaming bit. I sit here as a chartered accountant, hearing my profession undermined at every meeting. And I just feel we don't hear the other side of the argument. We just get ourselves into a blame culture, and rather than solving our problems, look, if we get this wrong, and there is a audit adjustment creeping up on us, it's really serious. We're 3 years away, I reckon, from real problems. And that means you've got to address them now, because it takes a time in the local government world for things to go through. And I just don't think that blaming the auditors is the right way. I'm much more like the sound of what Andrew Small was saying, which is, that we're heading towards some type of deadline when the auditors put up are qualified. I don't think there's any shame in taking a qualification if they're unable to look at some areas. We should have it specific as to what they are worried about. And what some of the things I've heard that they're worried about, they just don't matter. We can accept a qualification on those things. What we absolutely have to know is what those reserves are, what the restrictions are around them, And we've got quite a lot of so-called usable reserves, but only a small proportion of them, and I think it's about 16 million, having looked at the latest work we've been given, only about 16 million of them is there to cover deficit spending. The other ones are more like creditors that are money put aside for a specific purpose. And it looks as if it's about 16 million, which at our current deficit rate of overspending of about 5 million a year is about 3 years. So I really don't think we should take it lightly, and we shouldn't be relying on national changes. We should be pressuring our auditors to get the job done, and if they're going to make a qualification, we should take a qualification. I'd much rather be sitting here with a set of up-to-date, qualified, audited accounts than we are sitting not knowing, no one's even looked at 22 yet, let alone 23.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnucks. Councillor Smith?
I actually share some of your concerns about the level of reserves and the situation with the revenue budget, but I do think that the figures that we've got are accurate and sustainable, and I don't think we need to do too much delegating of the audit profession in the light of some recent and not so recent events. They've done a pretty good job of denigrating themselves. I won't mention Carillion too much, but there have been lots of instances where auditors have failed to protect large sums of public money. And this is what we're talking about here, is protecting public money. So I welcome the fact that progress is being made. I think it's taking far too long. And I do bear in mind what you say, Chairman, this has been going on for 5 years, which is about when the Audit Commission was done away with, when we had a system that actually did audit councils year in, year out, on time, and at a considerably smaller cost than what we're paying at the moment.
Councillor Dundas.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think we also have to bear in mind that, you know, you can get into a sort of they said, he said, it's their fault, our fault. But equally, when we had the auditors here and spoke to them, they did confirm that us as a council had taken over a year to respond to some of their queries. So I don't think we can be completely innocent in this. We do have to hold our hands up as a council and say we haven't been very good at replying to some questions either. Now, I know we have a new finance team now, so it's not any of the current people, but now I don't know who's telling the truth in this. You know, the auditors were telling us one thing, the finance team and our officers are telling us another. We're sitting here as councillors. Well, you know, does playing the blame game actually really get us anywhere? Probably not. But equally, we're not totally white on this in terms of our performance either. So let's be a bit realistic.
Thank you. I can see Mr. Small's hand is up, so I'm going to bring him back in. I'm conscious of the fact that this item was just a verbal update from the Section 151 officer as to where we're at with the expected unaudited accounts for 22-23. So I'll bring Andrew back in and then wrap this item up. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just really to, I think, support some of the things that have been said. Actually, in terms of I'm not leveling all of the blame for the current predicament at the door of the auditors. Actually, it's more complicated than that. But capacity within the audit firms is definitely one of the factors that is contributing to that, as is an over complexity in local government accounting. If I'm honest with you, and they'd be the first to say that the Financial Reporting Council, or whoever oversees the reporting standards, I suppose, has made life more difficult than it needs to be. I think so. There's an awful lot of time and energy involved in auditing things like pension statements, which don't actually have a great deal of bearing upon our overall financial position. And yes, there is some contribution as well from the finance team as well, and a lack of capacity and resources in that area. So I'm not saying that we're blameless in that regard, and there is probably no point in pointing the finger. But undeniable fact is the backlog of audits across the country is huge, and that's just not an underperformance in terms of supply of information at a Colchester level. That's kind of a systemic failure in the approach, really. But again, the cause of that is multifaceted. But I am as frustrated as everybody else in terms of the delay. I think, it is about credibility, and I think it is important to have clear and clear signed off accounts with a clean bill of health, really. And I think that gives evidence or gives the reassurance to our residents, really. So I think we're aiming for that as soon as we can. And Chair, can I just say after this item, can I have your permission to leave the meeting, if that's okay?
Thank you, Mr. Small. Just one thing before you go, to Andrew, just looking at item 8, there is a reference in 2 to the SIPFA Financial Management Code around completion of the self-assessment. I know that falls within your remit. If you could just update us as to where we're at with that. I know I'm going to the next agenda item before we finish this one. Then I'm happy for you to go, because I know you had a long evening yesterday as well. So if I could just ask you to update us with that, please.
So it's a priority for the finance team, if I'm honest with you, but it's not the highest priority just at this moment in time. Budget and final accounts are really taking precedence, really. So as soon as we finish those, we will get on to producing that statement as well.
Thank you. Anything else before I allow Andrew to go and we move off this item? No? Okay, thanks very much. So we finished on item 7, other than just to say, I think all of us around the table are concerned that we have accounts that aren't fully audited, haven't been fully audited for several years now, and the potential position that leaves the council in. That said, I think having spent as much time as I have personally over the last 7-8 months looking at the numbers, I am reasonably reassured that our accounts are as they are stated. And I know that Councillor Dundas was leader of the council for a couple of years ago, so we'll be aware of what the numbers look like then. And I know that the leader of the council has had a meeting with the alumni group, which includes the leaders of all the groups in the last 24 hours, where some of these figures have been looked at. Certainly the reserves have been looked at in some significant detail. So although I'm anxious that we don't have our accounts fully audited, I'm less anxious about the position of the council's budgetary position at this particular time. Move on to item 8, interim review of the annual governance statement, and we've just dealt very quickly with number 2, but I'll leave Ms McGrath to introduce the rest of this to us, please.
Thank you, Chair. So in front of you is the interim review of the annual governance statement, and some of you may recall back in June 2023, you received the annual governance statement for the 22-23 financial year. It's part of the Council Audit Regulations that we are required to provide a sound evidence of a sound system of internal control and provide a review of the arrangements that we have in place and any areas where we feel that those controls can be improved. So in June 23, you were given a copy of the annual governance statement, which was signed off by this committee before being signed off by the leader and the chief executive. But as part of the process, I bring you an interim report, an update on the controls that have been included in the action plan and where we are with those items. So for the 22-23 year, 5 items were identified where we could improve the controls that we had in place, or there were arrangements that could be improved. 2 of those actually have probably been dealt with in the first item. So item 2 on the action plan, as you say, is the SIPFA Financial Management Code. And then item 4 is the external audit implications and the issues relating to the lack of audited accounts for the last few years. The other two items that are, the other three items set out for you are the implementation of the CBH independent review recommendations. And you may recall back in 22-23, there was an independent review of the arrangements for CBH, but also CCHL. And they had several items that needed to be implemented. Several recommendations came out of those reports. And an oversight group was established to look at those. And at the meeting of the oversight group on the 31st of August, it was agreed that all actions relating to CBH had been completed. Now, there is some further work going on within CBH, and that needs to be reported through their reporting processes, and then items will be reported to yourselves. We are due to start an internal audit governance review of the independent reports of the companies, and that also will come through to yourselves as a final report in our audit reporting process. So you'll see a bit more relating to that later on in the year. One of the other items was the review of the capital programme, and the lead officer for that has given quite a comprehensive overview of where we are with the review of the capital programme. And I think it's safe to say that there's kind of some key developments with that in the review of the strategic approach, and they've moved to a corporate landlord model of delivery for our assets, and the creation of a Northern Gateway overview board to look at the development of those. And the last item, item 5, was the company governance carried forward from 21-22, which is relating to the CCHL independent reports and the recommendations related to the energy and housing companies, which have been reported to yourselves previously. So it's whether you have any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Hayley. Questions, comments? Councillor Sunnox?
Yes, CBH. I'm very anxious to get my hands around what's going on there, because I'm trying to look at budgets and alternatives, and it looks to me as if the costs of running CBH and the HRA are about twice what they should be. Absolutely huge overspend. We got 30 more staff in CBH than we had 10 years ago, and you know, I just don't know what's going on there. So that's why I'm very anxious. There's a piece of work here that's been finished on 31st of August 2023, and there's a report on it. And I understand we can't see that report. Is that a secret report? And, you know, how does the governance work, and how are councillors exercising their scrutiny over that part of the business?
Absolutely. It's not a secret report. It needs to be, we need to ensure that it goes through the correct reporting process, and that all of the board members for CBH, because it's a CBH report, have access to that first before it's shared more widely. As in the CCHL review, there are probably items that are commercially restrictive, but I couldn't comment on that because that's not my area of expertise. But the oversight group that was set up to review those reports consisted of members across all parties, so all group leaders, along with the leader of the council, senior officers of Colchester City Council, CBH and the M4 group of companies, along with the chair of Governance and Audit, sat on the oversight group, so saw those recommendations and saw the reports through from Richard Carr and Philip Sullivan in terms of what they've done within their organisations to implement those recommendations.
So they've seen that group's seen this report, have they?
I can't confirm that because I don't know what individuals have seen, so you would need to ask them personally.
I can say yes, I have seen.
Okay, it just seems that that's a long time from 31st August, particularly as people are asking for it. I'm asking for the 30-year numbers. Gather those are not coming through. And I think the other point is am I right in thinking that the housing revenue account acquisitions are going to be part of the corporate landlord model? Or am I thinking it's going to go the other way? It doesn't seem to me that commercial property and residential social housing necessarily go together. I'd regard social housing as going more to being more strongly connected to Colchester Borough Homes, the management company, and I'd regard the housing revenue account and the management company, as like a housing association, And that's what we should be benchmarking it against. And that's where I'm getting my figures about saying that our costs seem to be wildly out of line in this area. It's quite important.
Can I just interject here? Because I think, William, I understand and appreciate the direction of travel of your questions. Yeah. I'm not sure that, one, this is the report to answer them, or two, that Hayley's probably the right person to answer the detail of your questions. We, as you're aware from the work programme, CBH will report directly to G&A. There are councillor members of the board as well who are able to take questions forward to the board if you feel that they are urgent to be dealt with. But we don't have anything in front of us this evening that we can interrogate, or have any member of staff here with us this evening, or member of the board with us, who could probably answer some of the detailed questions that I think you're starting to ask.
Can I agree on the last point, but can I disagree on the other point with respect? We are here to see that all areas of the council's activities have proper scrutiny and governance. And we've got this HRA. Everyone thinks that because we've got directors sitting on CBH, we're looking at the council's balance sheet. The assets are not on CBH. That's just the management company. Our focus is pointed at in the wrong place. The real action's going on in the HRA, and I'm asking, is the HRA to go over, where is the governance for the HRA? It's not in CBH. Is it going to be in the corporate landlord model? You know, I really think it's an important governance point, which is what we are discussing this evening. I accept that the numbers points can't be discussed this evening.
Okay. Hayley, I'll just ask you to come back on what you feel you're able to answer at this stage.
Absolutely, and I would echo your comments in terms of I'm not an expert in the environment of the corporate landlord policy that we're moving to and the processes that are being followed. But I understand your concerns, and what I can do is take that back to the team and ask them to look at those concerns, and if necessary liaise with the chair about reporting to G&A in the future, looking at those areas if the committee feels that's something that they would like to review in the future.
And I'm more than happy to facilitate that. And you will be aware that, you know, we've been talking for a little while, and it's imminent, but it's been subject to other pressures on the officer's time over the last few months, I would say, not a few weeks, but a few months, that we need to have a member briefing on HRA, and in particular what this council's position is with its HRA. So I take your point, and I think it's important, you know, not only that those of us who sit around this table, but also all members of the council at least have an appreciation for what the housing revenue account is and how it should and does work. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Slightly similar question, and don't worry, I'm not to put ask too specific information from Hayley, but on the capital review programme, now, firstly, we've got a new capital programme which presumably will go to the budget meeting. I haven't seen it's been published yet, but it hadn't half an hour ago, but it might have popped up by now. So we've got that to look at, but I'm thinking particularly within that review. Now, there were a number of projects where the rationale for removing them was quite clear. It was just a practical level in the sense that they weren't things we did anymore. And there were also some new ones which have gone in there. Now, with the new ones, in most cases, we've seen the details. We've seen some business case because they've gone through Cabinet and been approved or reviewed elsewhere. But we've also got a few which are probably 3 or 4 years old, which the figures for, the business cases, are out of date. So is there anywhere, or is it available for councillors to see the financial new appraisals of the projects which are continuing, updated to 2024 costs, benefit, revenues, whatever you want to call them, to actually see the figures which inform the rationale for making those decisions around it?
off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that one, but I can take that away and find that out for you, and I'll come back to the committee to confirm what hasn't been done and what's available.
That's the perfect answer, Chair.
I think just to help Hayley along as well, you will be aware from our meeting with the leader and the chief exec last night that there is an intention to brief all members in the very near future on what the position is around the budget, and that will include capital programme as well. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yes, I must admit I was a bit confused because Councillor Sanks did make several references to the HRA, and then he started talking about specifics on Colchester Borough Homes, and he talked, for example, about the number of staff in Colchester Borough Homes going up. But of course, a large number of staff transfer between the council and Colchester Borough Homes, depending on various arrangements that we make in various areas. And we've recently, I believe, transferred a considerable number of staff, or in the process of doing so, from Colchester Borough Homes to Colchester Council. That doesn't make the organisation any more or less efficient. It's just where you're putting the head count in there. And it's interesting, and I would very much welcome Councillor Sunnock's input on the cost base, because Colchester Borough Homes regularly produce data showing they're one of the lowest cost providers on a large number of repairs and what have you. Indeed, those figures have been accepted by Homes England in the latest model that we put through, where our figures are in the lower quartile for costs. So if what you're saying is that our costs are an awful lot higher, how can they possibly be in the bottom quartile? These are figures. There must be a simple answer, and I would be grateful when perhaps the item comes up next time for Councillor Sunnock to put some input in there to discuss how we can have two sets of figures. Or do we have lies, damn lies and statistics, to quote another politician?
Right, I'm not going to get into a dialogue between Councillor Sunnock and Councillor Smith this evening. I will give Councillor Sunnock a very brief opportunity just to respond to that challenge.
Yes. If you look at the benchmarking figures, which I have looked at, and you try and reconcile them to the counts, you find they might bear some relation to what goes on in Colchester Borough Homes, but it doesn't look at what's going on in total. And it's about double. It's a huge difference per dwelling. I just look at the cost per dwelling, which is what they benchmark themselves on. It's a huge difference. I've been asking about it since the annual general meeting at which you and I talked, and I've been persistently asking, and I still haven't got a response to it. So I'll be quite honest. We need to get to the bottom of it. I don't trust the figures, and it looks to me as if we're about double where we should be.
Okay. So, I mean, that item will come to us because we know that there is an annual review of CBH that comes to this committee now. That's all been agreed in the last 12 months. So we'll have the opportunity to interrogate where we're at with CBH and what those costs are. Anything else, Hayley?
Nothing else that I'd like to add, Chair?
No? Thank you. Councillor Harris?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the first part of my question was exactly the same sort of theme that Councillor Dundas raised, and I associate with those parts of the question. So I'd go further, though, in asking the question, and I don't know whether that can be answered tonight, but certainly the strategic director has looked at the appropriate strategic finances available, the resources, and the programme under this new Programme Management Office, it says under there. I'm particularly interested in that because what worries me, if we're doing a rethink about the capital programme per se, and some of those items, Hayley, have been on there for some years, and they will have changed, as Councillor Dundas said, quite significantly in that time. Will that Programme Management Office look at risks under you, because you're very good at the risk register and risks about that happening again in the next 4 to 5 years, say, if that capital programme doesn't get delivered because of the appropriate resources, etc., and the ability to progress that project, will we look at that? Because that could well affect our budget in 3, 4, 5 years' time adversely. That's what worries me.
Yeah, the relationship between the risks of the projects and our strategic risks and delivery of our service is really understood. And I know it's an issue that has been raised by at least Councillor Sunnox in the past in terms of the reporting of those risks of the capital projects and the capital programme. So we are looking at that. There is a very clear and defined risk process for the capital projects. It doesn't sit in my area, it sits under the Project Management Office, but they have that in hand. But what I'm looking at doing is seeing how we can bring that information into our risk reporting in perhaps more of a succinct format, so not the same format as all the detail that you would have in the capital programme and the management office, but actually bring that in so when I do the 6-monthly reporting of risk to yourselves, a report relating to the capital programme sits alongside that and the projects as well. And I hopefully then that will give you a little bit more reassurance.
Thank you, Hayley. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Harris. And I know, you know, we've had reports around the corporate landlord model and the SIPFA report that's come to us in the last 12 months. And certainly I've raised, not at committee, but elsewhere, that as we move into this new model and we get a clearer picture of what the council's assets are, we need to have councillors a format whereby the councillors are actually overseeing what's happening with our assets and what's happening with capital. And I think that's been I'm assured that that's been taken on board by the administration, and it may well be that we see a change to our constitution in the not too distant future to ensure that that happens. Anything else on item 8? We're just asked to consider and comment, and I think everyone's done that. I don't see any other hands up, so we'll move on. Thank you, Hayley. And as we always say, we have the Hayley McGrath show at least once a year. Tonight is the Hayley McGrath show, so we'll move on to item 9, Risk Management Progress Report. Back to you, Hayley. Thank you.
My apologies, Chair. Every so often you have to put up with me for a whole evening. So item 9, as you said, is our Risk Management Progress Report. I bring a report to you every 6 months outlining where we are with our strategic risks. We have a strategic risk register that is owned by our senior leadership team and is reviewed on a monthly basis, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a moment. But what we do is set out for you what our key risks are at this point in time. So at the Appendix 1, you have the strategic risk register, and then that's set out in a matrix for you. So it's a bit more of a pictorial view of where our risks sit, whether they are above or below the risk tolerance line. And with the strategic risk register, as you would expect, the risks that have been identified are high-level risks. There would be no point me presenting you with a register that had lots of risks that were low-level and not as concerning, perhaps, as some of the ones that are on there. So the current review sets out the key strategic risks, top one being organisational resilience, followed by, unsurprisingly, the budget strategy, economic climate, cyber and data security, workforce wellbeing, and financial inequality. Now, there are areas that obviously our senior leadership team feel that we need to make sure that we manage those risks. And with all risks, we'll never negate them totally, but what we have to do is try and make sure that we have controls in place to reduce those risks as far as possible. So the register sets out for you 2 scores. It looks at the initial score of the risk without any mitigating actions, and then it sets out what actions the council has or will take in terms of those risks, and a rating for that risk after those mitigating actions have been put in place. As part of the report as well, I've also given you a brief summary of the work undertaken during the period. That's on top of the normal day-to-day work of managing risks and providing advice and guidance. So a lot of it has been around the council's subsidiary companies. So as you're well aware, as the reports that have been coming to yourselves, there's been lots of governance arrangements and reviews of the companies. And we're continuing to develop and implement those governance recommendations contained in the external reviews. And obviously the governance team and myself as risk manager are involved in those issues and making sure that we can provide a comprehensive response to them. And as part of that, what we've done is we've changed the rules for the Governance and Audit Committee. So we've strengthened your arrangements to reflect the fact that you're the designated shareholder committee for the subsidiary companies. And the creation of the oversight group, which I mentioned previously, which looked at all of those issues that came out of the reports and was a cross-party consideration. We've also introduced a streamlined process for dealing with housing disrepair claims. As you're aware, that's an issue that has been in the media nationally in the last year to 18 months, and also is an issue for the council itself. The Ombudsman reports that we have, you can see those coming through. And what we've done is brought together senior officers across both organisations to actually triage claims when they come in. They're not something that's insured. You can't insure against housing disrepair, so it's something that we have to deal with ourselves. It's not something we pass on to our insurance company. And as I say, we've changed the reporting programme for the Strategic Risk Register to Senior Leadership Board. So previously, our senior officers would receive a report once every quarter, and I would go along and talk to them about risk, and they would look at it and we would update the register. Due to the issues and concerns, and actually the understanding about the governance arrangements are so important, especially in the financial climate that we're in, what happens now is the Strategic Risk Register is a standing item at every monthly board meeting and is reviewed and updated every month. So it's very much a document that is live, and there's a lot more input from the heads of service into the risks and the necessary controls. So, and what we are doing as a result of that is looking at a more comprehensive SharePoint site, so making it a lot more digital friendly to actually accumulate and have a reference for all of our risk information. So that's our registers, our guidance and our training, and we will be opening that up to members as well as we develop that. So that'll be later on this year. And following on from the last report to the committee, the revised risk management strategy has been agreed and by Cabinet and full Council, and there's no amendments, and we've updated the policy framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Hayley, and we're very pleased to see you here all evening. Hopefully it won't be all evening. Just a sort of, well, a kind of suggestion really, and a comment really on the first two on the list, budget strategy and organisational resilience. I think on budget strategy, I think if we look back in the past, and it says there about where, you know, requirement for in-year budget and service adjustments, unplanned use of reserves, etc., etc. What we've had, or tended to have over a number of years now, is a line in the budget somewhere, which is under transformational programme or blah, 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 fit for the future it's called now. I think we've used up the thesaurus for finding different words which basically mean cost cutting. And we put a figure in there, £2 million or whatever figure, 1.5, blah, blah, blah. And then we've got to the end of the year and we haven't achieved it, that we've missed the target. And that has been quite a big contributing factor to missing the budget targets by the end of the year. And what's happened is we have set a target, let's be honest, let's call it cost cutting. We've set a target for cost cutting, which is not realistically achievable with the range of services we offer as a council. So I actually think under mitigation, there should be a line in there to say that the resilience, or is achievability a word? I'm not even sure if it is, of transformational restructuring programs should be tested. Is, when we put it in a budget and we put a line and a figure in a budget, is it achievable within the framework of what equally, on the same time, the council stated it wants to do over the next year? On the first line, organisational resilience, I think you can really sum all of that up in one thing. It's rather a sort of philosophical thing, really. And it comes down to what does the council want to be? And ultimately, it is down to the administration of the day as to what they want it to be. But what that says, and all those risks say, is does it want to be a council which does lots of things badly, or a council which does a smaller number of things well? And I think that is the fundamental decision the council's going to need to make, or is perhaps in the process of making, in the next few weeks.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. I mean, I would just suggest that the council has a wide remit for a very diverse community. So it's not that straightforward to be able to say we're going to focus on this limited amount of activity because it's more efficient or effective to do so. Because ultimately it has a responsibility to 100% of its residents, not just to a limited proportion of its residents. So I think I take your point, and I see from a private sector perspective where that comes from, and I also take your point about ensuring that what we put into the budget, what the council puts into the budget, about its intention in terms of making savings to fit, to cutting the cloth accordingly. It should be as accurate as possible. But I also would suggest, because of the remit, the wide remit of the council, it may not always be, it's probably not a task that can be completed in full, as fully as you're suggesting this evening. But I'll allow you to come back.
Yeah, I think probably what I was referring to, if we read what it actually says, it says one of the consequences is the council does not have the resources or resilience effectively to be able to deliver the strategic plan. So if that's the situation, you've got two choices. Either you up your resources or you change your strategic plan. I don't see ultimately what other option there is, if that is a fact or consequence.
And as you quite rightly pointed out, those are decisions for the administration of the day, aren't they? Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start what I'm going to say, Chair, if I may, with a note that I do talk to an awful lot of staff at all levels of the council, and our assets include our very well trained and dedicated staff at Colchester City Council. I think I'm very proud of what the staff do year in, year out at all levels, and I mean from the people who pick up my bins every week to the people who do the parks and this job, etc., etc. Now, it's very well written, I've got to say, the risk here on workforce well-being, but it's one I want to home in on, if I may, Chair. Monitoring staff morale and trends using staff surveys and monitoring the people dashboard is a good mitigation, I think, to some of the risks that you've identified here, really. The only thing I would go a step further and ask whether it would be appropriate or possible to include some sort of wording on the fact that some of our staff are reluctant, and have expressed that reluctance to me, to be totally honest with various tiers of management, because they sometimes feel that they're not allowed to do that and to go over that step the mark, when I want, and I think we wouldn't we in this room, them to be absolutely honest with their management, to say exactly how they feel about if they're under pressure. All the risks you've identified there are perfectly valid. I just wonder whether there's a form of words we can put under that first mitigation there that says encouraging staff to be expressly honest at all times. It says it, but it doesn't say in the words that I'm choosing to illustrate, to make sure that the guys I rub shoulders with, and I wouldn't mention their names, but the people sometimes feel that I've tried telling my boss, but nobody's listening, and I'm frightened of saying it anymore. And I don't want that as to be a culture, because these people, they're the people who deliver the services that this city council delivers week in, week out, and I'm talking about from the top to the bottom. No quarter, they're all doing a brilliant job. We just need to make sure they need to highlight everything. And I think if the Chief Executive was here today, she'd be agreeing with me, and I think that she would encourage that, people to be absolutely honest and straight. So if that could be altered at all or made stronger, I would welcome that, but well written, very well written for me, very pleased with that workforce and wellbeing section in there, if you don't mind me saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. The one for me, and I take your point, Councillor Dundas, about budget and organisational resilience, because I looked at those and thought the mitigations just about reduced that from very high to high for me. The other one that I was anxious about is corporate assets. And I say the fact that we still don't have an exhaustive list or detail of the council's assets does cause me some anxiety. But you know, we're using a risk assessment tool here, and the mitigations are put into that risk assessment tool, and the numbers just justify a high rather than a very high for those three areas. Councillor Sunnox.
I didn't put my hand up, but you guessed right. I think this is one of the best risk review documents, and I'm very encouraged that it's looked at regularly. I think we should take the first two risks really, really seriously. What are we being told? This is the officers and the senior leadership team saying to us that there's, you know, the workforce is weakened, finances are reduced, and organisational resilience is low. They're saying that the budget strategy does not accurately reflect the unprecedented level of savings required. I don't think, and then we've got a lot of answers in the mitigation that I don't know whether those answers reduce it from very high to high, but high is still jolly high. And I think we should be worried about it. And I think we should take it, you know, this is a message. This is the senior leadership team saying that really we can't balance the budget. That's what it seems to be. And, you know, we're waiting for the budget figures to appear. We're wanting to see where the substance is. Is this fit for the future, or whatever the latest thing is? Is it going to reduce staff numbers? Is it going to reduce costs? Are we going to have room in the budget to pay people properly? Quite left wing on this. I do believe that if you don't, you know, that we should be paying, we should be trying to be competitive in the market. And most of all, if you look backwards and you look again in the staff numbers, and you look at it whichever way you want to look at it, you can look at it with the three companies together. Look over the last 5 years, staff numbers increased, not decreased. So are we actually able to deliver these budget savings? And are those mitigations the right ones? I think they're probably about the most important things we've got to address over the next couple of months.
Thank you. Did I see you indicate, Dave? Well, me. Sorry, Councillor Smith.
So yes, I would actually share some of the concerns about how we monitor budget savings. Because, as you say, Councillor Dundas, you're quite right. If these savings do not materialise, the only alternative is to do less. Now, the strategy of sharing services with other councils is something which we have done in the past with the museum service, with North East Essex Parking Partnership. Actually, both of those organisations, I believe all their staff actually are on our books rather than on the various parts. That might be part of Councillor Sunnox's figures for the numbers. But we do need to make sure that those savings are being achieved, and if they are not, then we have to be prepared to take the serious action, as Councillor Dundas says, and do less. And that means withdrawing some of the non-statutory services that unfortunately our residents badly need and desire. And we are not alone in this. Councils up and down the country are facing the same problems. And it cannot be, just as with the audit reports, it can't just be our council that's getting it wrong. If councils up and down the country are facing exactly the same problems, and that may well give the urgency for the shared services. And we've seen with the finance positions what can be achieved there. And I think that is the route to produce the efficiencies that we need to help out. But we need to be able to monitor that. And I think this report does a very good job of highlighting the risks and what we're doing to manage them.
Thank you, Paul. I've seen Councillor Naylor indicate, so I'm going to bring Councillor Naylor in, and then I'll bring Hayley in and ask the leader just to wrap up. I'm aware as well that there was quite a detailed report on the BBC website today as well about local authority finances up and down the country. So this isn't something that's unique to Colchester. All I would suggest is, from what I've seen so far this year, we're not in the difficult position, or as significantly difficult a position that many other authorities are up and down the country. That said, it's not an easy time. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I've just been giving some consideration to the dashboard, which is great to look at here, but I'd quite like to understand the methodology that sits behind it. Because when we look at the initial score, for example, reference A, organisational resilience, and reference B, budget strategy, they are in the very high category. And then the residual score brings them into the high category. I know you have commented on that yourself, Chair. But what I'd like to be assured about is the methodology that sits behind that. Because at first glance, these seem quite qualitative judgments. And I'd like to understand a bit more about the rigour of the methodology and what degree of confidence we ought to have in these scores, which, very quick, brief look, there's a difference between the initial and residual score of between 2 and 8 points, which is quite a significant margin. So perhaps if we could just hear about the methodology, please.
Thank you. That's a really pertinent question. And those of us who've been through this before will be aware of how critical Hayley McGrath is, and how we have been critical of Hayley's own assessments when they come to us. But as Councillor Sunnix has already pointed out, I think the document that we have in front of us is a really helpful, useful guide to what's going on, and it gives us some food for thought and something to hang that food for thought on. Hayley, I'll ask you just to respond to Councillor Naylor's actual question, please.
Absolutely, and fair question as well in terms of how do we arrive at those scores, because risk by its very nature is subjective and it's all about personal view. A lot of risk, when you talk to people, it will be about their lived experiences, so it will be their perception of how likely something is to go wrong or not, as the case may be. For example, you talk to one person, they will love going on a roller coaster. Another person will hate it because they think they're going to hurt themselves. So everyone comes at it with a very different perception of what's acceptable and what's not. So what we do is we set out some parameters. So, and I notice in the agenda, it's probably how I sent it over to Matt, the printing of the score definitions. So on pages 33 to 35, no, 33 to 34, actually we set out the parameters that we give as guidance when they're looking at a score. So for every risk, what I ask our senior leadership team to do is look at the probability of something happening and the impact if it does happen. Now, impact, again, it will depend on what area you're looking at, but we look at key issues such as finance, service delivery and reputation. So what is the impact on those? So with a team assessment, it's always hard because you'll get some people who have a very clear view one way, and you'll have some people who will have a very clear view the total opposite. So the score definitions give us that parameter to provide some sort of agreed approach in terms of those risks. So primarily for things like budget strategy and economic climate and the financial implications, we would be looking at the financial impact on our service delivery. So the bottom line is, can we provide our services? Can we do what we are required to do as a local authority? So we then look at whether we can carry on delivering those services. If that happens, will that have an impact on the services that we can deliver? And we have a score from 1 to 5. So if I look at the probability first, we set that out. So a probability of 1 is up to 10%. It may happen, but it's unlikely. A probability of 2 is 10 to 25 is a possible. Going all the way up to a 5, which is over 75%. So it's almost certain that that will happen. And something, if I'm looking at an operational risk register, for example, if I look at Leisure World and the risk is we have an accident in the pool, that will be a 5. Especially in the school holidays, we will have ambulance on site probably nearly every single day. So it will be a 5. But if we look at somewhere like internally in finance, the likelihood of having an accident in finance is a 1 because it's probably not going to happen. We don't have that much of a risk area. And as I say, it is subjective, but that score table hopefully will give you an idea of how we set those parameters. And I do challenge our senior management, and I interview every single one of them individually at least once a year. So as part of the annual governance process, I talk to them about things that have gone wrong. And I always say that is the time I can ask the questions that you don't ask at any other time of year and not fear getting your P45. And I can ask them those things that perhaps some other officers, as Councillor Harris has alluded to, may not want to ask. But I do that as challenge. I also talk to them about their risks, and I ask them about what they think their risks are. And I pull out areas where I think we've got risks on the horizon. So I'll look at national indicators. I will look at things in the news. So, you know, I will look at, we were talking earlier about housing disrepair claims, and nationally what's gone on with those. And the likelihood is we could have something similar if we don't control it. I then meet with those senior officers at a leadership meeting, and I challenge them and I ask them about their risks. And when I go and talk to them about the risk register, I will ask them, do you actually think that's your key risk? And ultimately, what I ask them is, what keeps them awake at night? What is the one thing that they are concerned about? What makes them worry the most? And I think, going back to Councillor Sunnock's, the risks that have been identified are an honest assessment of the issues facing any local authority, really, at this point in time. And I would say I'm very fortunate. I talk to a lot of other governance officers and managers in Essex and wider who don't have access to senior management in the same way that I do, and aren't able to ask the questions that I do and aren't able to challenge. And we have a senior management team who are very conscious of demonstrating that they truly understand some of the concerns. We will never get it totally right because we can't identify all risks. There'll always be something that we don't see, but we're doing the best that we can to review what challenges are facing us and how we might respond to those. A risk register isn't about what has happened. So going back to Councillor Sunnock's, this isn't about this has happened to Colchester. This is what could happen to Colchester if we don't manage that going forwards. What situation we could be in if we don't have the right controls in place. And as I say, I think I'm very fortunate, both from our senior leadership team, but also from some of our senior members as well, in terms of that support for risk and the understanding of actually it underpins all of our decision-making process. So I'll get off my hobby horse in terms of how we do risk, but I just wanted to go back to one of Councillor Harris's points in terms of those difficult conversations. We do try and create safe conversations for officers with their managers and higher up. There is an opportunity for any member of staff to talk confidentially to either Andrew or myself, and we make that clear to them. We have a whistleblowing policy, but it doesn't always have to be as formal as whistleblowing. If you have a concern, you can come and talk to us. But what does happen in our organisation, which is pretty unique as well, is Pam, our Chief Executive, will talk to anybody, and we have slots where any member of staff can book and to have a conversation with her in a safe environment about concerns they have. Now, I can tell you from experience that I know there's been officers that have had those conversations with Pam, and she's been very concerned about what they've raised. She wasn't aware of those issues previously, and she's actually come to Andrew and I to talk about them and how we might deal with them. So we do try and encourage all staff to do that. There is always going to be people who are concerned about it, but I'll talk to our human resources team to see if we can kind of generate a bit more of that supportive environment and letting people know that it's safe to talk.
Thank you, Hayley, for that comprehensive and understandable explanation. Having spent the last 20 years of my working life risk assessing, where we used actuarial and clinical judgment, I always find this enthralling, but that's because I've been immersed in it. And you're quite right, some of it is always going to be subjective. Councillor Naylor, has that explained, has that answered your query?
In part, but as ever, the best answers always provoke fresh questions. So I'd like to just pick up a point, actually. And it was very interesting to hear about the process by which the tool is used. What does concern me in terms of assurance is that it's subjective in effect and lived experience. So I think my colleague, Councillor Dundas, alluded to this earlier when he said that, and I agree, there's been overly optimistic ideas of what might be saved and in the past, and I can only therefore assume that's the lived experience that is being brought to this audit tool, which in my mind means there is considerable risk still in those assessments. I remain concerned, having heard the explanation about the methodology, that there is an overly optimistic reduction through mitigation to a residual score that perhaps feels more comfortable to senior leadership. It's a challenge that exists, and I remain very concerned that there is a significant gap between what people would hope is the outcome and the lived experience, which teaches us often something quite different has happened.
Thank you, and I'm sure, because we're asked to comment as well as consider, so I'm sure that Hayley will take those remarks back, because I think they are relevant. I'll bring you back in, Hayley, and then I'm going to bring Councillor King in, and we'll wrap this item up.
And I totally understand those concerns. I actually have a session with senior leadership team tomorrow, and I will relay those concerns to them in terms of how we challenge. And what I would say is we do use our internal audit reporting process, our claims experience, our health and safety reporting, all feeds into giving that overview of where we might have some of those risks, but I will take that challenge back to them tomorrow.
Thank you. Councillor King, and whilst you're moving to your seat, I would just say, whilst up until this year, I think the council's administrations of all persuasions over the last few years probably has been a bit over-optimistic in terms of setting its intended budget reductions. Having spent as many hours as I have over the current municipal year looking at the position that the council has found itself in, I don't think anybody's going to be able to say that when the budget proposal is presented at full council in February. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee, for inviting me forward. I just want to say thank you individually for your contributions. I really do hear them, and they chime with how I see things. And I thought, bear with me a few minutes, I'll just walk through play some of that back. So, on the strategic risk register, it's great to hear. And I'm also another sad person who enjoys these things and had lots to do with it in the past. And that fundamental point about optimism and that bias, it's everywhere, and that does show itself over time. in how we see things and how the reality realises. So I think that's a point really well made. I hope we're addressing it in this budget cycle. The risk register we all are accepting here will help inform the conversations we need to have, but I'll get on to how we might end up doing things in a way that helps that process. I don't think that we're shying away from this to have this as an independent process from the estimable Hayley, who has appropriately sharp teeth, I say carefully. She hasn't had to use them on me, but we've had our own direct conversations, and you know that the support you have comes from the leadership of the council, but you've not had to exercise that because the culture you've described is the one that, whatever the administration we would want to see, which is that the senior leadership strike the right kind of note and tone. They make time for this, and I've seen this at work. This doesn't mean that they'll get it right, but it does improve the chances that they'll be closer to right. For me, that's a real fundamental, the cultural piece, which will then drive how things are expressed and then how we follow on. We have to accept that in the changed circumstances we're in as a council, and when we change the budget and the forward look, we have to invest in people, technology, and in change itself. We have to accept challenge by the nature of things. We must fund change delivery, and I don't think that's been done well before. I hope that the balance that will be struck and the papers that being finalised at this moment, when they come forward, will give assurance to members. But I take away from this conversation, and Paul, you and I have had this conversation as late as last night, that we have to show members how to give assurance, both in the detail of the changes that are coming through, but also assurance that they can be delivered. And as I say, that there's enough investment, enough contingency, and enough in time and money to ensure that when inevitably some things don't go right to plan, that we've got some capacity to soak that up, or to bring in expertise, an additional resource when we need it. We've got a leaner top team now. That leaner top team, good thing, saves us money, are very, very fully occupied with the day job of those 50-odd services we do provide, and likely to continue to provide in some form, as well as change. It's hugely emotionally and energy drawing, and we'll have to make sure we give them support. Two other points are closed, Chair, thank you. So on morale, I know the attitude is the one described. It includes things like a Speak Up Now group, which illustrates the style and culture, and it includes weekly visits by the senior team to different organisations, different parts of the overall organisation, and I've seen myself at least some of that spirit in terms of the senior leadership. So I just want to give you some assurance that for me, despite those risks being so high, rightly, the culture is right, the allocations of resource to investment and risk and contingent resource are of the right order. My last point is about cost reduction, where we go. I heard the remark, we will then have to do less. We are going to be doing less, full stop. We're in a process of reducing what we can do because we cannot afford. Paul, your remark's absolutely right. This is about cost reduction. It's much more than that, but at the heart of it is the necessity of getting the books to balance, but doing that in a different kind of way. Third sector, partners, North Essex councils. And the last hook on that is the point that's been made by members about this having to be monitored. It will have to be monitored. We'll look to do this cross-party. That's the way we've already said we will work. So I hope that here and elsewhere we can give members the assurance that we've learnt some lessons from past change programmes, and we've given ourselves enough space to be able to mop up the challenges that will emerge. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Hayley, is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I'm fine, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you very much for taking us through that. I would just reiterate Councillor Dundas's remarks that we thoroughly enjoy your contributions to G&A, and I look forward to the annual Hayley show. It's not over yet. Just before I move on then, so we were asked to consider and comment. We've considered and commented. And the last comment I just want to make before we move on to the next item is that Councillor Smith owed 20 quid to the Mayor's fund. So we'll move on to item 10, the annual review of business continuity. And although we're asked to consider and comment, we're also asked to endorse. So we do have a bit of a decision to make on this one. Over to you again then, Hayley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Before I move on to item 10, I will let Gillian know that Councillor Smith owes her £20 for the Mayor's charities. So item 10, as you say, is the annual review of business continuity. There is no formal requirement for business continuity to be reported to yourselves. However, we feel that it is good practice to report the work that we do in regards to business continuity and for you to endorse our strategy, as business continuity forms part of our risk management framework. So it's part of how we ensure we manage our risks. Business continuity by its very nature is how we carry on delivering our services if there is a significant disruption. So that could be anything from a building being unavailable through to major loss of our vehicles, through to an IT impact, which we know we have suffered in the past in terms of availability of systems, etc. So we have a process whereby we work with all the services and we identify the key service areas, those services that we have to carry on providing regardless. So for example, if everything else fails, we need to make sure our benefit payments are made. So ultimately, we need to make sure the most vulnerable of our community still receive the services that they require, even if we are faced with some severe adversity. And business continuity sits side by side with emergency planning. So some of you may be aware that emergency planning is about those issues that take place within our city. So they're the external things. So that could be anything from a major fire where we have evacuation through to flooding of West Mersey and an evacuation there, or a major train crash. And we have a requirement under the Civil Contingencies Act to act as one of the emergency services supporting the blue light services in one of those events. Now, business continuity sits alongside that because if something happens externally, our services and our resources will be directed to that, but we still need to provide our services going forward. So we only have one set of staff and we have to make sure that we can provide cover where necessary. So I've set out for you in the report some of the work that has been undertaken during the year. And we have been looking, obviously we have a new structure, management structure within the authority. So we've been looking at revised business impact assessments and business continuity plans, reflecting those changes in terms of our service groupings. We've also been rolling out a programme of testing those revised business continuity plans, because there's no point having a plan if we don't know that it actually works. So we do tabletop exercising, and what we try and do is do a kind of a significant exercise once a year in terms of doing some testing and actually not making people aware that we're going to do it. Obviously we don't try and panic them too much, but we do try and make sure that those assumptions that we've made in the plans actually work. And also, following the restructure of our senior management team, we decided to restructure our first call officer group. Now, first call officers are those staff that are on call 24 hours a day and respond to emergencies outside of working hours. So the first call officer is the person that helpline will phone if they get a phone call to say that there's an evacuation or something significant has happened. In the past, the role of first call officers was carried out by our senior management team, so that was our directors and executive directors. However, that doesn't fit with how the rest of Essex authorities do it. They go to the next level down, leaving the directors free to be able to manage those significant impacts on the organisation. So if in the 2 o'clock in the morning there's a phone call, a first call officer responds, and then the senior directors are able to take over in the morning. So The first call officer group has been rejigged, for want of a better description, and there are now, I think, 6 officers on a rota basis who take those out of hours calls. Andrew and I are 2 of those officers. So we respond, and recently I had a couple of phone calls with the severe weather in terms of partner teleconferences and things like that and how we respond. So we've received some tactical command training, so we know how to respond to an emergency. So we now have formal training and a formal certificate to show that we can respond to those emergencies, and we work very closely with the rest of the Essex authorities as part of the Essex Resilience Forum. So in terms of some of the actual issues we've responded to over the last year, there have obviously been some internal issues. We have had some IT-related issues that we've responded to, but some of our critical ones, some of them have not been, I would say, emergency issues of a bad nature. So the first one that I've highlighted for you is actually the royal visit back in March. So not only from the civic office planning side, our emergency planning team worked with Essex Police on the security arrangements for that visit, and actually our resilience officer sat at headquarters in Chelmsford with Police Silver on the day to respond to any issues that may have arisen. Fortunately, we didn't have any. Some of the other things that we had a phone call to say that we've got over 1,000 evacuees from Sudan arriving at Stansted Airport. Now, whilst Stansted Airport is not in our authority area, due to the number of evacuees arriving, we were asked to provide mutual aid in terms of providing officers to support those evacuees as they arrived at the airport, but also to provide some housing support and ongoing welfare support in our local area for evacuees that wanted to come our way, which our colleagues in Colchester Borough Homes did, and they spent many hours responding to that and worked at the airport alongside their colleagues. We had an emergency evacuation of tenants from flats in the Hythe back in June. So the fire brigade carried out one of their fire assessments and condemned the building with immediate effect. So there was no prior warning to that. All the residents of that building were evacuated. They were not allowed even to go back in to collect their belongings. Quite a lot of them were university students. And again, our team within CBH worked alongside the representatives from the university plus some others in terms of providing advice and welfare support to those tenants. As I say, we've had several teleconferences over the year, mainly relating to weather. So wind and rain has had a huge impact, and what happens is we have teleconferences normally called by the police or the fire service, where all of the blue light services work together to see how we're going to respond. So we will get prior notice, probably about 2 days out of any particular weather-related incident, when we'll start putting those plans in place and how we're going to respond to them. And that includes joining up our comms, so all of our comms teams send out the same messages. So you don't get a situation where you'll get a message in one part of Essex about how to deal with a fallen tree that's different to another part. So we had an audit of business continuity in September 23, and we achieved a reasonable assurance rating, and 2 recommendations were made, which was the completion of the remaining business continuity plans and the resilience officer to follow up on 4 areas of testing. All of those have now been implemented and agreed. We review the strategy on an annual basis just to make sure it's still appropriate for our needs. I've been through it for 2024. There's no particular changes to process recommended. We have updated some of the titles to reflect the new management structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith has indicated, and Councillor Naylor, Councillor Dundas. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to pay credit to the team and the way it worked when we saw in section 6.5 the situation at the Hythe. It's all very well having practice drills, but when it happens in a real emergency at, was it 10 o'clock at night or what have you, and there's a whole string of people need to be relocated, the way that worked and the service that was provided to help out there was absolutely correct. And yeah, there are many issues with that site, which I'll go into at another occasion, but the work that I think the emergency response from the council did was absolutely fantastic in solving the problems. Working, I have to say, with the Essex University, who were extremely cooperative on that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Smith. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just interested in the first call officer group, and I just wanted to understand when that change was brought about and how that's now working, if that's been brought about and tested, if you like, real time, or if there's any further comments about making sure that that, which is a key change to the plan, is as robust as we would like it to be.
Absolutely. So the change to the first call officer process came about in the summer. So when the kind of work was undertaken, reviewing the structure of the organisation and working alongside our colleagues in the Essex Resilience Forum, the senior management team were happy to endorse a new process, shall we say, in terms of that out-of-hours support. And I think that's quite appropriate. You know, a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning is probably best dealt with at a bit of a lower level than the strategic directors to enable them to take over the strategic management if it's a very significant issue. The change has been quite seamless. There's actually 7 officers that are on the rota. There were 7, we've now dropped down to 6, because obviously as people leave, sometimes it's not as easy to replace them. We don't force anybody to be on there, but what we do is we ask people who have the relevant expertise and understanding of the organisation. So, for example, 4 of the officers are in the governance team, so there's myself and Andrew. There's our resilience officer, Lauren, who's responsible for all of the business continuity and emergency planning, and our health and safety manager, who is Lauren's line manager. So the 4 of us, between us, have a lot of comprehensive knowledge. We also have officers from neighbourhoods on there who have an understanding and know what's actually required for an emergency response situation. So it's probably better placed now for the relevant people to be on there to understand what services are required and how to get hold of those services out of hours. We have a very comprehensive protocol and policy for first call officers. So there's a whole booklet, and basically we have a flowchart process. So when the phone call comes in, we know exactly who we need to phone, we know what numbers are, we check those every month, we update that every month, and it's clear that the officers on there are ones that have a lot of experience of the organisation, so they know instinctively who they need to talk to and how they can get that matter resolved. We will be reporting back to senior leadership team in the next month or so. They've asked for an update and a review, so we'll get some feedback from them to see how they feel that that's been going.
Thank you, Hayley. My experience of out-of-hours management as well was that it worked better with middle managers being the first call and senior managers being available if necessary to escalate. Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, very briefly, a similar comment. Really. I mean, I'm very happy to endorse the document. I think it sounds like it's working well on paper and in practice. I think the change to the first call officers makes sense. I mean, we've got a smaller senior leadership team, for no other reason, but I think actually having an immediate response around a more operational knowledge is totally sensible. I do, though, have to, I love the terminology. I think that the tactical command training, I'm going to go home with this terrible vision of Andrew charging around in combat gear with a submachine gun now. And I also, I have to mention on actually within the actual detail of the document where it says roles and responsibilities, members, political will to ensure there is a united approach. Well, there's a challenge for all of us, isn't there? And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. And in fact, I was going to raise that very point, but I'll bring Councillor Harris in first before I do.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm agreement in endorsing the document. I like what I'm reading here. I've read it 3 times. First call officers, though, a question about that. Yes, I agree with. I was on call for many years of my railway career on engineering and in different ways on the railway network. But first call officers, if they get called at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, as I often did when a job went wrong on a night time, you're knackered the next day. You're absolutely exhausted the next day. if you've been up half the night sort of mobilising forces, what happens to that person's task that they would have done the next day? Because you don't take them off for a complete day just because they're on call, I'm assuming. They've got jobs to do. And the final thing I would say, if I was on call, I wasn't allowed to have a pint down the pub that night. I was told not to, under the Transports Act, funny enough. It was an act of Parliament that said I was not allowed to do it if I was on call. So I was duty bound to have a cup of tea and a Coke or instead of a pint. Is there some sort of arrangement that ensures the viability of first call officers to make sure we are protecting them about making false decisions?
Both very good points. Hayley?
Absolutely. So in terms of what happens if we get called out in the middle of the night, touch wood, it doesn't tend to happen too often in terms of an early hours of the morning. And I've tempted fate. Andrew's actually on call for the next 2 weeks. I've just finished. Yeah, I've just finished my 2-week stint, so it's Andrew's turn now. If you do get called out in the night, what we say is you're not expected to work the following day. Everybody who's part of the first call officer group is at a level where they don't necessarily have to ask their manager's permission not to be there. We would send a message, so in terms of we are very experienced officers, so we would let our managers know. If there is something that needs to be dealt with on an ongoing basis, what will happen is we have a rota system for first call officers. So if it's an ongoing scenario, we then hand over in the morning to the next first call officer so that the original one can get some rest until such time as that emergency is over. So we would always carry on managing the incident, providing support to senior officers. So the first call officer, whilst an incident is live, there will always be one of the FCO group there. But we, as I say, we do that on a shift basis, so we hand over. In terms of work that's required, it is a case of the service areas that are involved know that those staff are FCOs and they have to understand that they will not be at work the next day. In terms of not drinking, there is no hard and fast rule. We advise all FCOs that they are able to go out, they are able to enjoy themselves, but they should be available at all times and they should be able to work at all times. The issue that we have, or the fortunate issue that we have, is because of the technology, no FCO has to be on site for an incident. Any incident and the way it's been set up should be able to be managed by an FCO from their home or wherever they are, as long as they've got their laptop. And what happens if people go away for the weekend, they will take their laptop with them. So as long as you can get your laptop, because the whole point of the FCO is not to actually do the action, it's to mobilise everybody else. So it's mobilising the response, say, from neighbourhoods or from the tree people or whoever it might be to actually deal with the emergency on the ground. The FCO role's coordination. So you are able to have a drink because we're not expecting you to drive. However, we do say that you should be able to work the same as you would come to work in the morning.
Coming back, Chair, if I may, just that final point, what happens about the vital task that that person may have had the following day when they're going to have to take that time off work? Who do they hand that vital task to? Is it their line manager or is it somebody beneath them?
It would be handed to their line manager. So if there is something vital that they have to do and they are not able to do that, that would go up to their line manager to resolve, the same as if they're off sick or something of that nature.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, in my experience, when I was on call overnight or weekends, I wouldn't arrange to go to the theatre or to the cinema, but other things carried on as usual.
Could I just come back on the point that Councillor Dundas raised around members and the political will to ensure that there is a united approach to business continuity?
You've stolen my thunder because I was going to come on. So before you respond to Councillor Dundas, can I just ask also, because I think that I looked at Appendix 1 and I thought it's key that members are actually identified as a role and having a responsibility here. There's some information in the document about training for responsibilities for officers, and Hayley's gone into quite a bit of detail about that, but there is nothing in here about how members know what the responsibilities are. At the very least, the group leaders ought to have some level of communication and if not training, but something that explains what the responsibility of group leaders is in the case of an extreme emergency, because that could be the case, couldn't it? So that was my question, really, looking at that. So I don't know, the reason why I jumped in, Andrew, is because I don't know whether you were planning to answer that as well.
No, I wasn't planning to answer a question I wasn't aware of, no. But I agree with you, and we will arrange something for group leaders. What I was going to say was an example of where that was in practice, and that was around COVID, when all political groups came together and did work extremely well. So I think that's just an example of it working in practice. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Right, so I think we've had the opportunity to comment and remark, and we've heard Hayley's very extensive responses. We're also asked to endorse the business continuity strategy, so I think, right, thank you, Councillor Harris. I think I'm seeing nods all around the table, so we endorse. Thank you very much. That moves us on to the mid-year internal audit assurance report. Back to you, Hayley.
It's all right. It's nearly over. Last one for you from me for tonight. So, like risk management, we bring 2 reports a year on internal audit. We bring you an annual report and we bring you a mid-year update. We have a comprehensive internal audit programme that is managed by our external contractor, TIA, and they carry out our auditing programme for us. We set a programme each year, so we have a 5-year rolling programme, but we review it each year, and actually you'll get a report in March looking at the audit programme for the coming financial year. But this report looks at the audits that were carried out between the 1st of April and the 30th of November 23. So there's some key messages there for you. The first one being that the most important, that there is an effective internal audit service during the first half of 23-24. We've met the indicators for that. We had 16 audits completed, 7 of which achieved a substantial assurance rating, which is the highest one that you can have, and 7 achieved a reasonable assurance rating. We did have 2 limited assurance reports that were produced during the period, both of those relating to procurement, so the City Council's procurement processes and CCHL's procurement processes, which also link into ours. There will be a report coming to you on your work programme in March with an update on an overview of the procurement policy for the council. So the officers responsible for procurement will be available to yourselves to answer any questions or queries you might have in more detail about that. In the key messages that I set out, 5 of the audits were awaiting agreement by management. I can confirm it's just 1 that's waiting for agreement now. So since this report was written, 4 of those have been finalised and signed off, and it is just the fleet management and fuel usage audit. That was only produced at the end of November. So I'm chasing that up with the service concerned to ensure that there's no issues with those recommendations. All of the other recommendations have been accepted. We did have 2 priority 1, which is the highest level recommendation, and you're probably not surprised to see that they came out of the procurement audits, hence why they were limited assurance. The auditors have provided a very substantial report on the audits that were undertaken. In that report, it details all of those ones that have been finalised, because they wouldn't include ones in there that hadn't been agreed by management at that point. So if you do want to see further details of the ones that have been agreed since, then obviously I can circulate those. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. Good to hear that all but 1 have now been resolved. I know when we had the briefing for tonight's meeting last week, it was agreed that we didn't need to have anyone from TIA come along to us because the report was extensive enough for us to get our teeth into. Did I see your hand go up, Councillor Dundas?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Very, very brief comment, really. On page 60, we've got the budgetary control assessment. And it states in there, as at period 9, I don't know if that's the calendar period 9 or financial period 9. In other words, I don't know if it's the end of quarter 2 or quarter 3 financial year. But it states the overspend variance of 689,000, which may well, I haven't got the figure, it may well have been the actual overspend. But at that point, the forecast figure given to us on the Governance and Audit Committee for the end of year was 1.45 million overspend. Surely, when looking at this, the forecast end of year figure is the more relevant one they should be looking at, or we should be looking at, because just looking at halfway through the year, you could have had a delayed expenditure or an expenditure brought forward, which means your actual expenditure at month 6 or month 9 can actually show quite a false picture. You could, it's like all of us, bank balances go up and down, you have a bill at the end of the month, it makes a difference. Or it goes into next month and it looks like you've had a very good month when you haven't, because you've got a big bill coming. So I just think that maybe we're looking at the wrong figure when looking at the budget. It should be the forecast outturn for the year is the critical one.
Noted, and I'll take that back.
Okay, any, Councillor Sunnock?
Yes, I have to admit that I wouldn't expect internal auditors to come up with anything particularly meaningful on the actual numbers, but they're very, very good on processes. And when we get these reports, this is quite an important point. We get lots and lots of what I call middle box stuff that is summarised. And the actual nuggets, and we had it in the last one, didn't we? When you started talking about COVID response and first call responders and so on, it all became interesting. Reports we get are in such professional language and they're all aggregated together. And that's what you have to do, I understand it. But can we have just a tiny bit of colour on what the problem is in procurement? What is it? Is it because we haven't got enough controls there, or is it because there's money being sloshed around and people using relatives' businesses? Give us some colour.
I don't know the full details with procurement, but primarily it's around some of those processes in terms of being able to demonstrate control. So in terms of the procurement, we have a very defined procurement process. What we're probably not as good at doing at the moment is ensuring that we have got demonstrable evidence to make sure that we can show we understand all of our contracts and we know exactly how they're being managed. So it's about that central control of contracts and procurement. We do have a new procurement team in place, so they have been given additional resources, because previously we probably didn't have sufficient resource to be able to do a comprehensive procurement management process, but that's being addressed. There is a new strategy, so as I say, that will come to you in March to give you more of an overview, and I think you can probably ask some of those more colourful questions then.
Thank you, Ellie. I think the blurb actually refers to most of the issues being within CCHL, which, because of the changes to CCHL, they won't entirely disappear, but they will reduce anyway. But the suggestion in the management comments is what's being followed, so that should reduce the potential for risk there. I haven't seen Councillor Smith.
So yes, also on procurement, I take your point about the CSHL, but I think some of the issues there that they weren't putting items out to tender, which over £50,000, which is a serious failure of procedure not to do so. The internal audit were good to spot them. We also had the failure, though, or the limited assurance in our own procurement one. Now, sadly, that one wasn't agreed by the time of the report, but has subsequently been agreed. I would like to see that report circulated to members, because there is one urgent finding in there, and I think waiting another 6 months for it to come up for us to check that that urgent finding had been dealt with is probably not good enough. So I would like to see now that report has been finalised, that to be circulated to us, if that's possible.
If you give me one moment, I can find the report and I can find out exactly when that was agreed for you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Hayley. I think that would be very helpful to circulate that to members of G&A.
Thank you. I mean, there's just a possibility there might be a common failing with the procurement ones on CCHL, in which case I guess we might want to have a look at CBH's procurement as well.
Would you like me to give you a verbal update on that one, Chair?
Thank
I've
you.
got the report in front of me.
If you have it in front of you.
So I can give you a verbal update. So the report highlighted that a recommendation was made in 21-22 that a review be carried out of all suppliers with total annual purchase orders of over 45,000 and contracts be put in place with the suppliers. So there were some cases where we were spending with a supplier across the organisation, so it wasn't the accumulative spend then went over the thresholds, but because each individual service didn't realise another service was spending with them, we had that situation. Where required, the services should be retendered to ensure compliance with the Council's contract procedure rules. So it was confirmed that a category spend review that has been completed by the procurement team, however, testing of a sample of 35 expenditures over 50,000 found that 14 of the suppliers do not have contracts with the council and were not engaged via tender process. The procurement team also did a review of suppliers with over 45k spend as recommended in the 21-22 audit. 117 suppliers had expenditure over 45,000 and the following is noted. 74 suppliers are not on contracts register and not on procurement pipeline spreadsheet. 21 suppliers are on contracts register with current contract. 22 suppliers not on contract register but updated details on procurement project pipeline spreadsheet. So the recommendation from our auditors is in compliance with the Council's contract procedure rules, suppliers with expenditure over 50,000 must be tendered in order to obtain value money for the Council. A guidance be issued to all services to remind them to comply with the contract procedure rules. So that's been accepted by management. And they've put a full review of spend over 45k has been completed and the team are now working with heads of service to determine owners for contracts going forward. There is a significant amount of work to now complete procurement processes for all of the areas required and this will take some time. Significant work has been carried out to ensure the contracts register is up to date. New processes have been put in place to reject hold purchase orders over 45,000 when no evidence of contract or waiver is produced. So they are working towards those and they've given a timeline of the 31st of March 25 to complete that because of the number of contractors that they need to go through to make sure that they all comply. Now obviously that is something that you can pick up when the report comes to you in March. There was another recommendation made and that was a level 2 recommendation and that was sample testing of waivers, and that out of 20 waivers, 18 of the 20 waivers of the forms included the reasons for the waiver. So they just highlighted there was a couple of forms that didn't have the reason, they weren't satisfied the reason was on there for the waivers, and that's been accepted and has been implemented.
Thank you very much.
That was helpful. Any further questions or comments? No? Right. So we were just asked to review and comment in accordance with the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015. I'm comfortable with what we've heard here. Everyone else? Yeah? Right. That is the end of the Hayley McGrath show for another 12 months. Thank you very much. Well done. I always look forward to it, Hayley, you know that. Work programme, item 12. Mr. Evans.
Thanks, Chair. There's nothing I particularly would draw the committee's attention to. The work programme has been discussed quite extensively in recent meetings, but just a couple of things that have come up this evening. In February, the committee is due to receive an introduction to an update on the housing revenue account, which has been mentioned tonight, and in March, as Hayley's mentioned, there is an overview of the council's procurement policy, and as you mentioned, Chair, CBH performance monitoring for 24-25. So those things will be coming back to the committee as part of the work programme. Unless there's any comments or suggestions, there's nothing I'd like to raise more. Thank you.
Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, it's just I know we've discussed it in the past, but just to reiterate, I think at some point a look at IT is, we might not be able to have time this year, but even if it's next year. This is a CCC laptop. At 6:20 this evening, it came up and said your organisation has decided, controls your updates, and it decided to go offline for 10 minutes doing several reboots because somebody in CCC's IT department has decided 6:20 is an ideal time for laptops to update. I've also noticed that whereas the authenticator, when you tick the box, it used to be for 7 days, it's now 1 day. Just on the items I regularly use, that's 10 authentications a day minimum I now do from picking up council emails, and I think perhaps an opportunity to express from councillors to the IT department some of our frustrations would be good when we have time. Thank you.
Thank you, and I share your frustrations. I don't use CCC equipment, so I don't have to worry about that. But I do have to use the authenticator, and that does frustrate the heck out of me, I have to say. It was bad enough when I had to do it every 5 days. You got 7 days, did you? Right. But now that it's almost every time I log in, and I can even try and look at something on my phone whilst I've got something on my laptop, and it makes me authenticate again. So I think it's a good point, and we'll see if we can fit something into the next year.
Chair, could I just remind members there is an all-member briefing on access to email, cybersecurity and related issues on the 6th of February.
Thanks for the reminder.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If we can log in.
But I think the point that Councillor Dundas is making is that we may want to review. I think that's a briefing on how things, but we may want to review what the processes are and whether or not there aren't some more user-friendly processes, let's just say. Right, I think that's everything then, isn't it? All done? Right. If there's nothing else, then thank you one and all for your contributions this evening. I wish you all, a warm evening, shall I say.